Josh here, and this is my review of the movie The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, originally called Men Who Hate Women in Sweden. Not surprised they changed the title. Anyway, this is a Swedish crime thriller. It's the first in a trilogy, and before you turn off the video right now, I wanted to say go and watch this movie. Please listen to the review, because you should know what you're getting into, don't get me wrong, but you definitely also should check this film out. This movie is for a very specific taste, so I'm actually quite surprised that it ended up on the novels have ended up on the bestseller list, particularly if they contain the movie's same very graphic violence, not only of a physical nature, as in blood and guts, but also of a sexual nature, which is very discomforting. And I'm not a prude, but it definitely went a little far. However, it did work to the character's story arc, so I can't complain too much. Anyway, the story in this movie is terribly convoluted, and I mean that in the best possible way, as the best mysteries always throw so many red herrings in your path that you have no clue who committed the crime right until the very end. There's a lot of interesting bits to it, a lot of cool subplots along the way, and particularly the atmosphere of this movie doesn't opt for the thrill-a-minute kind of mystery like the Da Vinci Code or Angels and Demons series does, but instead a sense of impending dread, where since the story is split up between the city and largely the Swedish countryside and a small island known as Hedeby, it portrays the city as kind of downtrodden, rotten core place. Everything terrible happens there, and even out in the country, which initially looks peaceful and serene, is actually almost even worse than the city. And this sense of dread is heightened by the sense of isolation that this movie has, because most of the movie, like I said, does take place on the island of Hedeby, which is connected only to the mainland on one bridge, and the majority of the movie takes place in winter, very black-white kind of cinematography, very cold-looking, very isolated. Like I said, really plays into that sense of dread. It gives it an interesting feel that not a lot of mysteries go for. And this movie is actually quite daring in that respect, I think. For little over 2.5 hours long. This is a very slow movie even for that, and it works to the movie's advantage, but I think it could easily put off a lot of people. I guess it didn't really suffer from that internationally, but I imagine here it won't pick up as much traction until the proposed remake with David Fincher comes along. Anyway, it is a big problem though, I think, because I really do enjoy this movie, and I wish people would check it out, seeing as it does have a wide release, which surprised me greatly, considering it is a 2.5 hour Swedish movie. Doesn't exactly play to the North American mainstream. Anyway, getting back to the story. Like I said, it is terribly convoluted. It's split between two characters. It is split between Mikael Blomkvist, who's kind of a disgraced journalist who now works for an industrial head on a personal case, as well as a very interesting heroine who is the titular girl with the dragon tattoo, Lisbeth Salander, who is kind of a goth, hacker, bisexual, bunch of other things. A very interesting character, violent past that slowly is given to you piecemeal throughout the movie, and really played quite to perfection by the actor, whose name I cannot recall at the moment. Noomi Rapace, I believe. And pardon me on my pronunciation, I am not exactly familiar with the Swedish names or language, so forgive me. Anyway, like I said, both these characters add a lot to the story. Blomkvist is definitely the narrative thrust of the story, but at the same time, I think Lisbeth Salander really keeps you interested outside of just kind of the cold and very convoluted mystery. It adds a dash of excitement that, while it is there in the mystery, is accentuated by her presence and her involvement. And it's actually quite a while into the movie before she becomes a major force, but once she does really join the movie proper, she actually does, when you look back on it, she does provide the narrative threads to conclude the movie's themes. So she really does play more of a role than Blomkvist, despite being in it much less than he is, I would say. And the story, though, is really, really good. It's told via a combination of kind of just close-ups on newspaper clippings, which, by the way, are incredibly creepy, and I really enjoyed that, again, adding to the sense of dread. This is not a thrill-a-minute movie, but it keeps you incredibly engrossed. It really does make you obsess over the mystery as the characters do. It is a good mystery, and a lot of the key players have interesting backstories themselves that, even if are only touched upon, definitely add some spice and flavor to these rural surroundings. And as though the story may be very old in nature, kind of the Shakespearean family drama, it does add a lot of unique twists, I think the Swedish sensibilities really plays in here in that it does seem quite unique from anything I have seen before, despite it having a very familiar storyline that anyone who's watched any CSI or Agatha Christie will recognize. Overall, I really enjoyed the story in this. It's hard to play it down as a bad thing. The only thing that I would need to mention to people is, again, what I said near the beginning of the review. This movie does contain a very, very explicit use of sexual violence that, if anyone's seen the French film Irreversible, it really does remind me of that movie. It's not quite as bad, but there is two very graphic and very, very discomforting rape scenes in this movie that do play into the story arcs as a whole, and the movie as a whole, but are nonetheless really, really disturbing. So, for the prudish or squeamish among you, might want to give this a pass. Still, though, honestly, it is a quality experience, so I would advise you still to check it out, but that's something I do need to let people know of. Overall, like I said, though this is a very slow movie, even at only 2.5 hours, and I say only 2.5 hours because most movies nowadays seem to be around then, it does give you a lot to think about during the movie. There is a lot about it that you need to absorb, and none of the time really feels wasted. There's a lot of things happening, there's a lot of mood-setting pieces, and particularly the ending, though some may think it goes on a little long, I appreciated them actually closing it out rather than leave it on a cliffhanger for, again, the inevitable sequels that are to be released, because it felt more like I experienced something quite fully. I've got to know these characters, I got to know their problems, they solved their problems, they got this huge mystery solved, and it really felt like everything wrapped up quite nicely. Not in a cliche, everything's perfect way, but in just that it felt like I've watched a full movie for once. It's amazing, I know. Anyway, like I said, story is fantastic in this. It's a little hard to describe how unique it is through words alone. It really is mostly a visual thing. And like I said, due in large part to Noomi Rapace's Lisbeth Salander character. But it definitely excels in that area. There's some great characters here, even if most of them are quite lecherous. And I definitely recommend that movie on this front. And one thing I do need to actually really specify is the effects in this movie are actually quite good for a Swedish film. And I don't mean to be rude because I'm not, again, familiar with Swedish cinema, but going by other foreign cinema that I've watched from a number of countries, the effects here are actually quite good, and most of them are physical, so that they should be, but quite a few of the CG effects, particularly fire at one point in the latter half of the movie, looked so convincing that I wasn't sure if they had actually set the fire on something. Which, you know what, they may have. It's entirely possible, and I commend them for doing so, for sticking to physical effects, but if it was CG, then that's amazing. Lastly, I did want to go into the sound. I have a couple of things to say about this. The score was very good. It was downplayed, so you didn't notice it as much, but again, played into the quiet, obsessive tone of the movie. The only thing I do have a problem with is that in a couple the kind of boisterous, like, holy crap, reveal moment music was playing when the big reveal really wasn't being made, which seemed kind of odd to me. Otherwise, I really enjoyed the score. The music itself was great, so I can't complain. I only have to think about the placement. Last thing I did want to say, which is almost entirely unrelated to the movie, is that I am really fucking pissed about theaters that don't check their sound systems anymore. Is it too much to ask to have the sound not clip out during a portion of the movie? I mean, I haven't been to this theater in a couple years, and I went back solely because I had a gift card for this place, and I said, hey, fuck it, I'm going to go watch A Girl with a Dragon Tattoo in theaters rather than online. So I did, and it was an enjoyable experience, but greatly diminished by this fact that the sound was terrible. And I mean really, really bad. There was a portion of the movie where it would click at any kind of high sound, even talking, and I was right about to walk out of the theater at one point. And that thing really kind of disturbs your viewing experience, it really does. I almost wanted to, because last time I did that in the theater, I got free tickets, but whatever. It fixed itself, unrelated to the movie review. Overall, go see With the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I can't say enough good things about it. It's for very specific tastes. It's a very dark movie, and it is certainly one that will only appeal to a sect of people. But at the same time, it's a very unique murder mystery. If you don't really like murder mysteries, I would suggest going to see this because it does get off a very unique feel. It's very interesting. It has a very different cultural flavor. And if you enjoy foreign film, definitely check this out, particularly if you can stand long, structureless movies. And I don't mean that in a negative slant, but I mean one that doesn't have a traditional beginning, middle, and beginning, middle, end. It does have the climax, but a lot of the movie is just a stream of events. See that how you will. I enjoyed it. Go watch The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.